Today on the Weekly Strange, we'll take a look at a real-life hell hotel, a place where you could check in if you had a life insurance policy, but you couldn't check out. Home to one of America's first serial killers, HH Holmes, we'll take a grisly tour through what was a 3-story version of Dante's Inferno in Chicago and gaze into the machinations of a truly evil and disturbed mind. Only today on the Weekly Strange. Good evening and welcome to the Weekly Strange. I'm your host, Jon F. Merz, author, actor, adventurer. This week is, it's something else, I have to tell you. I was researching hotels in the 18th century, and I stumbled across a horrific example of the depravity of man. Now, I know last week I told you that this week we'd be out in the field, and that was definitely the plan. But we've just gotten a slew of really bad, inclement weather that made our field research impossible. Plus, this week I'm attending a film festival for a movie that I wrote and star in called Fletcher's 5, which is also further complicating the production schedule on that episode. But don't worry, we will have that field research episode for you within the next few weeks. Okay, back to Hell Hotel. But first, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. HH Holmes is the alias of one Herman Webster Mudgett, who was a medical student and a pharmacist even as his insatiable bloodlust grew and transformed him into one of the most evil men in the 1800s. Holmes was born in 1861 in New Hampshire to a family of Methodists and a father who drank and beat his kids mercilessly. Holmes attended the prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. While there, he experienced extensive bullying at the hands of his classmates who were jealous of his academic prowess. Made to place a skeleton's hands on his face, Holmes's initial terror turned to fascination with death, and he reportedly became obsessed with it, and the dissection of animals followed. He graduated with honors at the age of 16. From there, he enrolled at the University of Vermont for a year before heading west to attend the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. In spite of his less than stellar academic career there, he graduated 5 years later. It was during his time at the university that he started working with Professor William James Herdman. Now, Herdman was the chief anatomy instructor at the school. The two of them, Holmes and Herdman, worked very closely together and were rumored to have engaged in grave robbing so they might procure fresh cadavers to dissect and research. In 1886, Holmes formally adopted his alias H.H. Holmes and moved to Chicago. Once there, he discovered a drugstore and started working there for Dr. Elizabeth Holton, who owned the place. While many suspected he killed the doctor after he purchased the drugstore, that turned out to be false. Holmes did purchase the empty lot across the street and started construction in 1887 on what he said would be a mixed-use building with space for retail shops, offices, and apartments. Construction, however, slowed when Holmes refused to pay the builders, and they took him to court. After settling the case, Holmes started working on a third floor to the building. He told investors that the building would be used as a hotel for guests that were arriving in Chicago to see the World's Fair. Now, in the aftermath of the murders that Holmes admitted to, and others that were ascribed to him, the tabloids of the day said that Holmes constructed this hotel with the explicit purpose of luring innocent victims into his murder castle, as they called it, then where he proceeded to kill them and sell their cadavers to various medical schools. Holmes did have a history of selling cadavers to medical schools, but he usually obtained these through grave robbery. He also stood accused of defrauding insurance companies using the cadavers. The tabloids had a field day describing the supposed inner workings of Holmes's labyrinthine hotel, saying, just crazy stuff, like it was equipped with a crematorium in the cellar. There were trap doors, chutes from the rooms for funneling dead bodies down to the basement where he had a dissection laboratory, rooms with peepholes, sexual dungeons, and lots more. Now, most of these claims would later turn out to have been constructed by the press for the purposes of selling more papers. In 1895, the World paper published a made-up floor plan of the murder castle that caught the eye and helped spread fear about the Holmes case. The reality, according to other sources, was that the hotel was mostly unfinished. It did contain several hidden rooms and an ability to funnel gas fumes into some of the rooms, as well as peepholes for voyeurism, or even perhaps just watching some of his victims suffocate to death. In the end, it really depends on what version you'd like to be real, even though the rumors of the murder castle's evil are most likely exaggerated, and there are still TV shows that claim the nefarious accounts are actually the true accounts. It's really up to you to decide. Whether fueled in part by the sensationalist accounts from the press, or as revenge for the victims of Holmes's crimes when they came to light, the hotel was torched in 1895, shortly after Holmes was arrested in Boston for a series of killings. Actually, he was arrested on an outstanding warrant for horse theft, but he would later be arrested and charged for those killings. The building, the murder castle, was rebuilt as a post office that remained in service until 1938. Now, Holmes also owned a one-story factory that he said was to be used for glass bending and was equipped with a very powerful furnace. But investigators would later find little evidence of glass bending in the factory, and authorities would conclude that the factory's furnace was likely used to destroy key evidence of Holmes's crimes. Now, as for the murders that Holmes is known for, they include men, women, and children. And one thing that is obviously not up for debate is the fact that Holmes was an evil and sadistic man who seemingly took great pleasure in killing his victims. And note that the details of these murders all came to light following Holmes's arrest. Now, a man named Benjamin Pitezel was his first confirmed victim. Holmes had concocted a scheme with Pitezel to defraud an insurance company by faking Pitezel's death. Pitezel agreed to the scheme, but was double-crossed by Holmes. Holmes, instead of procuring a cadaver through grave robbery to stand in for Pitezel and his supposed death, Holmes instead used chloroform to subdue Pitezel and then burned him alive. Holmes was then able to collect the insurance money since it was actually Pitezel who was dead. After that, Holmes manipulated Pitezel's widow and somehow convinced her to sign 3 of their 5 kids into Holmes' custody. Holmes then took the children on an extended tour of the United States, but while doing so, he locked the 2 girls, the daughters, in a traveling trunk and asphyxiated them by cutting a hole in the lid and funneling gas into the box. He buried their corpses in a basement in a rental house in Toronto. And things didn't end well for their brother either. Holmes apparently drugged the boy and then dissected the body before he burned it in the chimney of a house Holmes had rented in Indianapolis. Now, as I said, Holmes was arrested in Boston on an outstanding warrant for horse theft in Texas, and he was tracked down by Pinkerton agents who arrested him on that warrant in 1894. But authorities by now had begun piecing together the gruesome career that Holmes had enjoyed, and in October 1895 he was found guilty in the death of Pitzel and sentenced to death. Following his conviction, Holmes sold his story and confession, for which he was paid $7,500, to the Hearst newspapers. In this confession, he admitted to the killing of Pitzel and the 3 children, and also then proceeded to claim responsibility for 27 murders in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto, as well as a host of other attempted murders. And among those murder victims were the following: a 31-year-old mistress named Julia Smythe, who had worked at the pharmacy in Chicago; 23-year-old Emmeline Sigrand, who Holmes employed as a secretary; a 24-year-old actress named Minnie Williams that Holmes had hired to be his personal stenographer; and Minnie's younger sister, 18-year-old Nanny Williams, who had come for a visit and never left. Other claimed murder victims included Emily Van Tassel, who had also worked at the drugstore; creditor and presumably one of his investors, John DuBroil, whose death Holmes used to defraud another insurance company; Kitty Kelly, yet another woman hired to be a stenographer; and John Davis, who had visited the World's Fair and never returned to his hometown; Harry Walker, who had gotten involved in another one of Holmes's insurance fraud schemes; a Dr. Rustler, who had an office in the murder castle and went missing; Milford Cole, whom Holmes sent a telegram to instructing them to come to Chicago; Lucy Burbank, whose bank book was found partially incinerated in the murder castle; and George Thomas, who was killed by both Holmes and Pitzel in a Mississippi swamp in 1894. Other deaths would later be attributed to Holmes, who seemed to have done the majority of his killing during the span of 4 years. But there are other deaths that Holmes has been at least partially credited for that took place prior to those years. In addition to his murderous work, Holmes was also a polygamist. He married 3 women over the course of his life, never divorcing any of them, although he did try to divorce his second wife on the grounds of infidelity, but the claims could not be substantiated, and the court basically dismissed the case. He also fathered 1 son and 1 daughter, and they both died in 1956, 6 weeks apart from each other. Holmes finally faced the executioner on May 7, 1896, at the Moyamensing prison in South Philadelphia. Shortly before having the noose tightened around his neck, he faced the assembled crowd of witnesses and, still retaining his amiable spirit and apparent lack of fear, requested that his coffin be contained in concrete and buried at least 10 feet deep in the ground to discourage grave robbers from digging up his corpse and presumably doing to it what Holmes had done to so many others. Perhaps in a final display of justice for the victims, Holmes's neck did not break upon being hung. Instead, he slowly twisted on the rope, twitching this way and that in agony as he was slowly strangled to death. It took him 15 minutes to die. In a somewhat eerie postscript to this story, the caretaker of Holmes's murder castle, a man named Patrick Quinlan, committed suicide by ingesting strychnine on March 7, 1914. Quinlan, who had reportedly been unable to sleep for several months beforehand and was suffering from hallucinations, left a note behind that said simply, "I couldn't sleep." Now, whether due to an actual haunting or just the pressure of having helped keep the nefarious secrets of a serial killer, the Chicago Tribune noted that with Quinlan's passing, the mysteries of the murder castle would remain forever unanswered. Holmes's request that his coffin be contained in concrete was granted, And in yet another eerie postscript, his corpse was exhumed in 2017 due to persistent rumors that he had somehow escaped execution. Because the coffin was contained in concrete, normal decomposition did not occur. Instead, his clothes were preserved to perfection, and even his mustache was reportedly in excellent shape. He was identified by dental records and then quickly reburied. Having confirmed that Holmes did not, in fact, escape execution, there was little point to prolonging the exhumation. Thus, the story of HH Holmes, the insurance fraudster and one of America's first serial killers, comes to an end. Whether the sordid details of his murder castle were true or greatly exaggerated, there's little doubt that his murder spree was one of utmost evil and depravity. And what I find interesting about this case is that it happened only a few years after the infamous Jack the Ripper murders in London. I mean, were they somehow connected? Had Holmes been, a fan of the Ripper and his work? Had he taken cues from those grisly killings and applied them to the victims in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto? We may never know. And with that, we draw another episode to a close. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. We'll see you next week here on The Weekly Strange. And be sure to check out our other shows on this channel, like The Hunted, where we follow true crime, real-life fugitives that are still on the run from justice, and also The Other Side of Midnight, where I talk to callers about their paranormal experiences. For now, I'm Jon F. Merz, author, actor, adventurer. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our uploads. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time on The Weekly Strange.